Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and Leap, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning and TestBright, helping students with Test School and Life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is business versus engineering majors for tech-minded students. But first, let's meet our special guest, Mike Hammer.
Mike Hammer brings decades of experience in higher education, admissions, and consulting to the conversation. He earned his business degree from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. During his 25-year tenure at Cornell University, he worked closely with admissions leadership and served as an application reader for 14 admission cycles. In that role, he helped university administrators interpret evolving application trends and adapt to an increasingly diverse and dynamic applicant pool. Mike has also mentored STEM-focused student groups, including the Menair Scholars, guiding students as they navigate the complexities of higher education. Drawing on his extensive experience, Mike offers a deep understanding of how to align each student's strengths, goals, and aspirations with the right academic environment, and how to effectively communicate a student's unique story to admissions readers. Welcome.
Thanks, Amy. Nice to be here.
Mike, it's great to have you on the show. You've actually been on the show before, back in episode 463 for an IEC profile, but this is the first time we're going to get a chance to dive into some of your specific areas of expertise and insight. Before we do that, though, we'd love for you to share with listeners who you are, what you do, and why you love what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm Mike Hammer. Right now, I am an admissions consultant. I work primarily with STEM students, as you could probably guess. I like to help students find what their next best step is along their path. Education and careers are a long running thing, and every student needs some help along the way. And I specialize in helping students make that jump between either high school and undergraduate years or undergraduate and graduate, especially in STEM.
When we were talking about possible areas of STEM students heading to college to explore, one of the things that came up was this idea that for a lot of tech-minded students, it's not just a default to say that they're going to pursue engineering majors, because a lot of students, maybe more students than you'd think, consider business. I find that surprising, right? I think like if I'm on that science track, I'm thinking science, I'm thinking engineering, I'm thinking physics, maybe something in biomechanics, I don't know. Is it your experience that a lot of students on that track jump to business?
Yeah, it's actually surprising to me how many people approach me, contact me, and say, I've got a student and they're really good at math and science, but they're also really interested in business. And so in high school, they're in the STEM club, maybe the robotics club or the physics club, and they're doing a couple of business competitions on the side. And then, of course, their AP courses in physics for mechanics and electro and magnetism, but there's also AP economics and AP statistics and things like that. And a lot of students find an interest in business by doing that. And one of the things that I always forget, that I have to remind myself about a few times a year, is in the United States, there are actually twice as many undergraduate business students as there are undergraduate engineers. And a lot of those students are actually interested in both. And so, picking between one or the other can be a little bit stressful. And fortunately, there's a lot of places where you can either change your mind or switch tracks. And so it's not a 100% critical thing that you absolutely get it right the first time, but it sure does make your life easier if you land in the place that really fits you.
It's fascinating. This is something I've shared on the show before. There was an article on the CNBC site a while back that shared that the 10 most in demand bachelor degrees, meaning the ones that students have or let's say the ones that employers are focusing on for college graduates, every single one of the top 10 lands in either the engineering, computer science, or business bracket, right? So
Yeah.
you're talking about students that are really well poised to launch out of college. When you think about it, if you have any experience, I mean, I know you do, but Mike, but other other people, well, if you have experience with a lot of students that studied math in college, they hit a fork in the road where they can decide to go into something pure research, something academic or intellectual, or they become quants. They go to Wall
Yep.
Street and make
Yep.
millions of dollars there. So that path is pretty clear. I'm less familiar with the engineering student who might want to just work on big projects as part of a company versus the engineering students that have a bigger vision for how they might create their own companies.
Yeah, the whole idea, you're on the edge of that thing that colleges like to call entrepreneurship. And what entrepreneurship really means is you have an idea that you want to make into a business somehow. So the difference between a creator or an inventor and an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur actually gears their idea up into a business where they're selling something, they're making something, and so they have to get involved in all the marketing and the production and how do they find customers, how do they contact customers, what do they do about returns, if the project is a success, they end up working with hiring staff, and then you're into the whole HR world. And so on being an entrepreneur really crosses six or seven boundaries all over the place. And we find quite often that an awful lot of the entrepreneurs are actually really good at math and science. So there's this common thing coming out of high school where if you've got a student who's good at math and science, about two-thirds of them are going to end up kind of leaning on the business side, and one-third of them are going to tend to stay more in what we consider pure engineering. So they're going to be a specialist in mechanical or electrical or aerospace or biomed or something like that, as opposed to a business person, which it kind of has a much broader scope.
Well, I think it's interesting. When you were talking earlier, I was thinking to myself, the connection to me between this sort of STEM and business is typically entrepreneurship, the idea of creation, innovation, invention. So I do wonder when somebody leans more towards math and science, is that the idea that they will eventually create something that they will want to create a business for. So to me, the knowledge or experience to invent would be essential. The skills of business, you could find someone to help. So to me, like, I'm a business person, but I sure as heck am not going to invent anything, you know. So it's an interesting thing, like product wise, right? Like that, to me, you'd want the math and science to be able to create the invention, is what I'm thinking.
I see it from a different perspective, Amy, and I think of like us as educators. We're technicians on the educational side, but we're also entrepreneurs. And what you were describing about, crossing multiple boundaries or, that when you're an entrepreneur, you're using more of your brain. And I think you might be describing, Mike, a lot of students that they have very broad interests. They happen to be really good at math and science. They happen to get numbers and formulas, and you can apply that to math. You can apply that to science. You can apply that to finance. And maybe they're visionary, right? Some engineers are makers, and they don't just want to make a product. They don't want to make
Right.
a widget. They want to make a whole enterprise.
Yeah, they want to make the whole thing. So there are lots of cases of this. Like there are really famous engineers like Steve Wozniak, who designed and made by hand the first Apple computers in his garage. And Woz was very much into making the computers and everything else. And of course he met and teamed up with Steve Jobs, who was like a business genius. And so between the two of them, they had both sides of the road
I was going
set.
to say the two parts of the brain came together with
Absolutely.
that, right? With
Absolutely.
that. But I wonder, as a high school kid, right, if you know that like you're interested in engineering or STEM and the idea of like you can't really be a business person because you'd have nothing to sell or create.
Oh, I think that, so I get, yeah, you're saying like if you're engineering minded and you go into business, then where's your engineering education?
Right. I could like that's what I'm thinking. But again, that's presuming that a student in high school is imagining a future for themselves where they have created something, where they have invented something. And then that, of course, like you said, Mike, there's a whole slew of skills that are
Yeah.
involved in like production, operations, HR, if one then
Right.
enters the business world.
Mike, how do students square that circle? If they're engineering minded and they choose to go into business, how do they get their engineering?
Well, it's funny because it's much more common to start in engineering and go to business than it is to start in business and go to engineering.
Absolutely.
And I think it's because it's the difference between focused and broad or hard. I think of it, I you see it most of the time online talked about as things versus people, right? And the stereotype is that engineers are interested in things and business people are interested in people. And I haven't really found it to be that way. I found it to be more hard versus squishy, right? Engineers tend to be interested in things and understanding how things work. And a thing could be a software program or a thing could be a train. There's anything that's small and definable, and engineers really get into digging into how does this thing work and what affects it, what makes it better, what makes it worse. And business people tend to be very, very broad in what they think about, and they don't like being kind of stuck in a lab all day long for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. They might be able to do it for a day or two when they're developing an idea or bringing forth one product or something like that. But you look at some of the really great business people in the past, they all had their period in the beginning where they were hands on the product, developing, making, shipping, writing labels. There's that great picture of, the first desk at Amazon, which was actually on a stairway landing in a building, with a phone in the corner with four lines on it, and that was, and a little sign in the corner said Amazon.com, and everything started from the one desk. But later on, he's worried about things like issuing stock and keeping investors happy, and what about marketing and international shipping rules, and all these big picture things.
It's funny. I
Uh,
just noticed that recently because I attended at my alma mater. They had sort of an entrepreneurship evening where students who are launching like their own businesses were sort of there to talk about and, and present. And so some of the businesses were service or whatever. And there was one in particular that was like this invention, if you will. And so it was really interesting with talking with a student because he clearly was more of a STEM kid and he had this invention, but in terms of where the invention would have application, that was the thing that it was like, well, I don't know. We're going to see if it could work here, it could work there. And I think that's the idea. If he obviously was a STEM kid who could invent, but where this could land in terms of
right.
business, that was sort of, he hadn't figured that out yet. Obviously, the others, one was event planning. She knew exactly what she was doing, she knew exactly who her audience was. So I think that's kind of where the brain, where it's a little different to be able to have that inventive way and then figure out how do you bring it to market and who's your clientele and what do you use it for. But I think you mentioned something interesting earlier, which is talking about students' interests. And so I'm thinking about interest in terms of, you know, we hope that when we go to college, the classes that we take are interesting or appealing to us. So I'm kind of wondering what would be the major differences between taking business courses in college towards a business degree versus taking engineering courses as an undergrad in college.
Yeah, so the major difference is that business courses tend to get broader over time in terms of the topics that you get into, and the variety of topics that you get into. Engineering courses for one discipline actually get more focused as you go along. So in the beginning, the first year of business school and the first year of engineering actually look very similar. And I can say that because I did my freshman year in mechanical engineering, and then I switched to business my sophomore year. So I actually saw both of them live in real time, and they're very, very similar. There was actually just one course that I had to make up. So, so in engineering, you start with, math and physics and chemistry, and you'll have one actual engineering course your first semester. You'll have one engineering course your second semester. And then in your sophomore year, you'll have two engineering courses each semester. Once you get to your junior year, every course except one is engineering, and it'll be very focused in the path that you chose. If you picked mechanical engineering, you won't take any civil engineering courses. You might take an economics course as a breadth course, but it'll be a one course. That'll be the only one. Whereas on the business side, yeah, you take your math and a little bit of science, but you only take 1 year of math instead of 2 full years of math. So only two courses instead of four. And and then from there on, starting your sophomore year, you'll start to take courses in different topics. You'll take economics, and you'll take a finance course. You'll take a banking course. Everybody gets a legal course. At Berkeley, we had to take a minimum of 1 year of law courses in our business undergrads. And we could take up to 2 years of law courses if we wanted to.
Is that still the standard that you take that many law courses as a business major?
At Berkeley, you take two law courses. Every business school I'm aware of requires at least one law course. It's usually called something like business law.
That would make sense.
Yeah,
Well, so what I'm wondering here though is when we're talking what you just described about essentially a lot of schools are going to have gen ed programs where there are certain things you have to take
right.
that's going to apply. And like you said, by the time you get to junior year, then you're really much more engaged in whatever that specific major is. I guess
Yeah.
I'm walking it back to somebody being in high school and applying to colleges. And we do know that at some schools you can apply and then you eventually choose a major. But there are obviously colleges where you apply and you get accepted specifically to an
Right.
engineering program or specifically to business, which kind of
It narrows
potentially
things down a
pigeonholes you.
little bit.
So I'm curious, like, how do you make this decision when you haven't even taken your first course in college?
Yeah, what I do is I talk with a student for about a half an hour. We talk about what they've done and what they like to do. And what I'm really looking for is what are they thinking about when they're not actually in the throes of doing the actual creating of something. Because it's very much like everybody gets down and into the product the same way. They're like, oh, I had this thought. So it's almost like giving birth to a baby. You see what it is in your head, you see what you want, and all your effort is towards bringing that vision into reality the way you saw it, right? And then the question is, after that, do you start thinking about ways to enhance it, or do you start thinking about ways to sell it and get it to other people and get it tested? And gee, what if I market it? Those are the kinds of things that tell me that someone is probably going to end up on the business side.
Mhm.
And we also have to remember this is a big spectrum. I mean, there are engineers who literally do what I call hiding in their office creating. And then there are engineers who spend 20% of their time creating and 80% of their time basically as managers, as project leaders, and talking to the public or interfacing with the marketing people. And there's a big spectrum across here of how things happen. And everybody will fit somewhere on that spectrum. Obviously, if you're more on the technical side, you're better off starting in engineering. But if I've literally had students where the first time I met them, I could tell you're a marketing person, you're a business person, you're a CEO type, you're a lawyer. You're more naturally a lawyer. You're more naturally a doctor than an engineer.
They're
Doctors.
systems thinkers, but the way they think of systems applies more to organizations or activities or enterprises than just mechanical devices.
Exactly. So they tend to be very broad, and when they think they tend to think expansively rather than zeroing in on things. Like I know three or four really top level electrical engineers, and to me this is where I see it the most. They love to sit at their desk and just zero in. I mean, they're literally looking at how do photons move across pieces of silicon. That's they love that. And I'd be good for about 20 minutes of that, and then it's time to move on.
So, Mike, we know that engineering majors are highly competitive. In a
Yes.
lot of colleges, you just like those are the seats that fill up first. Are business majors today just as competitive?
Yes, they are. What's funny is the top schools, I actually looked this up, knowing that we were going to have this discussion today, I actually looked it up last week. So the number one undergrad business school in the country is Wharton at UPenn. Okay. And the number one rated engineering school in the country is MIT. I'm going to leave Caltech out because they're so small. They're really a specialized school. So MIT versus Wharton, believe it or not, their admissions rate for their undergrad programs are the same to the first decimal place. They're both 4.5% admit. So they're literally just as hard to get into if you're looking at your chances in admissions. Um, as you go down the list, you get down to like compare the number 20s, you start seeing that engineering is still being competitive, more competitive, and business is starting to get less competitive. And I think that's a little bit because of the volume of students that the schools are sized. Once you get out of the top 20, the schools are sized much bigger for business. Um, but in general, engineering is slightly harder to get into. Business gets to be less, but the competition at the top is really fierce. The competition in the middle is about the same. I mean, if somebody wants to be an engineer, I can usually find a couple of schools that they'll get into. I've had students all the way down to 2.8 GPAs in high school, and I've gotten them into engineering schools. And I've had students with 4.0s, and they've obviously gotten into business schools. So it can take a little work sometimes to match them up, but there's pretty much a place for everybody out there.
So I'm wondering, obviously students are high school now, especially if they anticipate having to apply to a competitive program. They're working to build that resume for college and high school. And so oftentimes what we advise students do is to participate in activities, right? Either activities or classes that can help them to get more knowledge to either decide whether they want to do something or not. I usually think of more programs in high school for those STEM kids, like robotics, or there are things that they can do. I'm wondering if a student is going to a school where maybe there's not sort of an offering of business opportunities or business like classes or activities, is that a problem for a student on their application if their high school didn't offer, let's say, for example, business classes?
Yeah. So one of the things, this is kind of going back to my years as an admissions reader, but one of the things we look at when we're reading applications is we look to see what's available in the high school. Every high school creates a summary at the end of the year saying what courses they offered, what the students' grade distributions were, things like that. So if we see someone applying for business school and their high school offered no courses, that'll be very apparent. And we'll know that there was no chance for that student to take a business course. So we'll be looking at what opportunities did the student create for themselves, or what opportunities did they go out and find that apply to their stated interest. So there's some great national competitions, like DECA is the big one, DECA, and I forget exactly what it stands for. That's kind of the big nationwide business thing.
Yeah.
There's a couple of world economic competitions that are really well done. And the one that I try and have all my business students do is the John Locke essay competition out of England, where every year there's a topic and everybody in the world writes on the same topic, and then your essays are basically ranked and you fall into groups. Um, you can Sometimes students are able to find internships or jobs in the area they want to go into. Obviously, engineering and business aren't places that students can typically walk in and get a job
Let me
because
run the
the
company.
lack of yeah, exactly. Hi, I want to be CEO for a
Hey,
week.
but you could start your own company, right? And
That's
I
right.
think
That's right.
Absolutely. Entrepreneurship is so easy to access these
it
days.
is. And
Yep.
I think what's interesting that you're saying that is such a great takeaway is that If there are not opportunities to take classes at your high school, the mere fact that you have the interest, the motivation, the drive, the initiative, if you will, to seek those out or to create those opportunities, I got to believe on your college application, that speaks volumes that you took that initiative to engage in those opportunities.
Oh, it really does. And one of the real shocks for a lot of high school students who are going into business is they go to literally their first day with their new fellow students at college, and they're very happy and proud that they started a little business, and they did whatever they did, and they were quite successful at it. And they go, and every person they talked to in their school did something similar or was involved in something like that. It's no longer they were,
They're
in
not
high
unique
school
at
they
that
were
point.
in high school they were the one person that did it, and in college everybody did it. I actually found that kind of exciting, because then I finally had people that I could talk to, other people who'd created things. And if you don't do something like that and you don't have that initiative, that's kind of a sign that you're not in the right place. Like, that's one of the differences. To me, that's the defining difference between an engineer and an entrepreneur. If you're going to say who among the engineers are entrepreneurs and who aren't, the engineers are the folks like the electrical engineers who are looking at photons all day long and they're absolutely fascinated. And the entrepreneurs are like, how do I make this a business? How do I sell? I want to invent something that I can sell. How do I figure out what I want to invent? And then, because what I really want to do is sell it, and I need something to sell. Whereas the engineer is like, I don't care about selling it. I just want to make it. I want to make cool stuff. And there's places for all those people out there.
This is a fascinating conversation. Mike, we could talk about this with you all day. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Oh, it's been great to be here. I was really looking forward to this, and it's been as much fun as I thought. Yeah.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yep. The best way is through email. You can reach me at mikehammer@stemadvising.com.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.